In a stunning move, yet another House Republican, Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin, just announced that he's retiring from Congress. The move comes on the day that Republican Congressman Ken Buck is retiring. The move by Gallagher will sink Mike Johnson's House majority to one single seat. How is that for disaster by today's House GOP? The irony of all of this? Only 1 week ago, Mike Johnson was complaining that Ken Buck had only given him half an hour's notice of his own retirement. Quote, lots of notice, 30 minutes, yeah. Before continuing on and saying, I think, I hope, and I believe that that's the end of the exits for now. And look, I'm not going to tell the Republican Speaker how to do his job, but perhaps Mike Johnson should avoid the prediction game. The Wisconsin Republican had already announced that he wouldn't seek re-election after he contended with major blowback for refusing to vote to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. But what Republicans didn't expect was that he would actually bail on the full term and instead retire just a few weeks from now. According to Gallagher, he was long jaded by the antics of the House after McCarthy was ousted as Speaker. In other words, while the chaos may help chaos agents like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz and Jim Jordan, it's only hurting the GOP more broadly. And yet, that's become a recurring theme in today's Republican Party. The purveyors of dysfunction regularly throw their own party into chaos because it benefits them specifically. The Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the party want the chaos because it builds up their brand. They get on TV, they get on the internet, they get clicks, they can send emails and fundraise off it, they get attention. And in an attention economy, that's all they want. They don't care if they have to burn down their own party, their own government, their own democracy to get it. And speaking of attention, that's exactly what Greene got today when she did this.
I filed the motion to vacate today, but it's more of a warning and a pink slip. I respect our conference. I paid all my dues to my conference. I'm a member in good standing, and I do not wish to inflict pain on our conference and to throw the House in chaos. But this is basically a warning, and it's time for us to go through the process, take our time, and find a new Speaker of the House that will stand with Republicans and our Republican majority instead of standing with the Democrats.
That's a warning. If it's a warning, if it's a warning, does that mean that you're not going to go through and force this vote?
No, I will. There's
nothing that can convince you to back off.
There's not a time limit on this. It doesn't have to be forced and throw the House into chaos. I don't want to put any of our members in a difficult place like we were for 3.5 weeks. We're going to continue our committee work. We're going to continue our investigations. There's a lot of good investigations going that have to be able to proceed, and the American people deserve that. But I'm not saying that it won't happen in 2 weeks or it won't happen in a month or who knows when. But I am saying the clock has started. It's time for our conference to choose a new speaker.
Do you believe, thanks, Congresswoman, do you believe that there are more Republicans who support this push? And ultimately, if this does get filed, it could lead to exactly what you're saying, more chaos, more paralysis. Does the House Republican conference want to move forward with that?
It's filed, but it's not voted on. It only voted on until I call it to the floor for a vote.
That was Greene introducing a motion to vacate against Mike Johnson. Why? Because he committed the cardinal sin of passing a budget to keep the government open. That's it. Mike Johnson saw the virtue in not cratering our economy and shutting down essential services and sending millions of Americans home without paychecks, and all of that was a bridge too far for Marjorie Taylor Greene. The problem is that now, with fewer and fewer Republicans actually in the House, we may soon be in a situation where, with only a one-seat majority, if Republicans don't have their full conference for a potential motion to vacate vote, they could actually lose the speakership to Hakeem Jeffries, which I suppose is exactly the level of dysfunction that would make sense for today's GOP. And let's be clear, this is the exact dysfunction that caused Mike Gallagher to quit in the first place. I mean, talk about cause and effect. You could not have a clearer indication of why the House GOP's majority is flailing than this exact shenanigan that someone like Greene is pulling right now. So if someone like Greene is wondering why Republicans will have less and less power moving forward, she might want to consult a mirror. In the meantime, I hope that the American people are watching this and taking the lesson out of it that's becoming clear as day. Even Republican lawmakers are conceding that their party does not know how to wield power, does not know how to govern. They are leaving because there is no point to being there. Unless you're trying to build your social media following like Greene or Gaetz, then there are no laws getting passed, there are no bills advancing, they're not lowering costs or making healthcare more affordable or creating jobs. It's just a few lunatics demanding attention for their own personal brand building purposes. It is the Marjorie Taylor Greene show, so frankly, it's no wonder that no one else wants to be a part of it. As for the rest of us, as we see people like Ken Buck and Mike Gallagher run for the hills, remember that if Republicans are in the majority next cycle, it is the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the party who actually get emboldened. Not the elusive moderates, but the extremists. So when you cast your ballots in November, remember that there's the Democrats, and then there's Marjorie Taylor Greene, and there's nothing in between. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to the channel and do your part to help grow the progressive media ecosystem. I don't do sponsorships or paid ads, I won't ask for money, but just subscribing to this channel goes a really long way, and it helps get the message out to more people. The subscribe button is right here on the screen. You can also subscribe to my Spanish language channel, which I made to reach those crucial Spanish-speaking voters. That link is on the screen too. And finally, if you want to listen to my audio podcast, you can follow that link as well. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much.
Are any of the machines, I know it was on War Room the other day with Steve Bannon, have any of the machines been looked at? He had said that one was looked at in Georgia.
I'd have to check on that in terms of Georgia. I know during the audit they did check on those machines. They're really, if we can just go off the record for 1 sec here.
Yeah, sure, of course. I don't want us to say it if it's not. That's why we're checking.
I think they have looked at the machines. When the Secretary of State did its audit, there was a fair bit of looking at the machines. The audit came in pretty darn close to what the machine count was with the receipts. So, I don't know the outcome of those, but our understanding, again, this is from the Secretary of State's office, was that there weren't any physical issues with machines on those inspections.
Again, that was on December 5th, 2020. Trump campaign officials saying there weren't any physical issues with Dominion voting machines.
That was some devastating new audio obtained by MSNBC that shows that Trump's own campaign knew there was nothing wrong with Dominion voting machines, but refused to admit it publicly because Trump was busy spreading the big lie that ultimately resulted in the January 6th insurrection. And it's pretty telling that the campaign official here is only willing to say the truth over the phone when he goes off the record. Why? Because they were lying to the public in order to try and steal the election. And remember, while Trump's own campaign was confirming off the record that Dominion voting machines were totally fine, Trump himself was demanding that the Georgia Secretary of State find 11,780 votes because he was falsely accusing election workers of illegally changing equipment on the Dominion machines.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state, and flipping the state is a great testament to our country, because and there's just it's a testament that they can admit to a mistake, or whatever you want to call it, if it was a mistake. I don't know. They're changing the equipment on the Dominion machines, and then that's not legal. And they supposedly shredded, I think they said 3,000 pounds of ballots.
And just to add one more layer of irony to all of this, the swing state counties that had Dominion voting machines mostly voted for Trump. Yes, really. The company that they were all accusing of some mass conspiracy that was supposedly switching thousands of Trump votes to Biden votes that one of his lawyers said was part of a secret scheme organized by the Venezuelan government. Those machines actually conducted elections that mostly went to Trump. Trump didn't have a problem with Dominion. He only had a problem with the Dominion machines that Biden voters used to cast their votes. There is no consistency to these conspiracies. It's just about whatever is expedient for them at a given moment. And sometimes they're even saying different things at the same moment. After the 2020 election, there were Trump supporters in different states across the country demanding that they stop the count and also count the votes, just depending on whether Trump was ahead in a given state or not.
Count the votes! Count the votes! Count the votes!
And that's what's so dangerous about this whole MAGA agenda. It's one thing to have wildly different views on any given topic. It's another thing when you're dealing with a cult leader who is completely untethered from reality and who will fundamentally change his views at a whim to gain power. And it's made that much worse by a network like Fox broadcasting to their millions of viewers these lies over and over again, even though their own hosts know that they are lying. When Fox called Arizona for Biden because, Biden got more votes from voters, this is what Tucker Carlson said in a group chat with Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity. We devote our lives to building an audience, and they let Chris Wallace and Leland fucking Vittert wreck it. For Tucker Carlson, it wasn't about the objective reality that Biden had won Arizona. It was about building an audience, regardless of facts or truth. It was about feeling entitled to fealty in repayment for having spent years on TV. As far as Tucker's concerned, you all owed him blind loyalty because he felt he deserved it. And remember, this is the same guy who admitted out loud that he is a liar.
I mean, I lie. If I'm really cornered or something, I lie. I really try not to. I try never to lie on TV. I just don't, I don't like lying. I certainly do it, out of weakness or whatever.
And we especially know that he's a liar because according to his own text messages, he secretly hates Trump. We are very, very close to being able to ignore Trump most nights. I truly can't wait. I hate him passionately. I blew up at Peter Navarro today in frustration. I actually like Peter, but I can't handle much more of this. Tucker even called Trump a demonic force, a destroyer in another set of text messages. And thankfully, we know all of this because Dominion's lawsuit against Fox is moving forward, which is ongoing and only getting worse for them. But while Tucker and other Fox hosts were saying these things behind the scenes, this is the garbage they were spewing on air on their shows.
Not only did they use a Venezuelan company to count our ballots, which almost should be illegal per se. Number two, they didn't allow Republicans in key places to observe the mail vote. That makes the mail vote completely invalid. Now, they didn't do it everywhere. They did it in big cities where they have corrupt machines that will protect them, meaning in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, in Detroit. They didn't have to do it in Chicago, in New York, or Boston. They could have. They have corrupt machines there. They did it absolutely in Phoenix, Arizona. They did it absolutely in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Republicans were shut out.
We've got evidence of corruption all across the country in countless districts. The machine ran an algorithm that shaved votes from Trump and awarded them to Biden. They used the machines to trash large batches of votes that should have been awarded to President Trump. And they used a machine to inject and add massive quantities of votes for Mr. Biden.
With this particular thing that's going on now, I've been all in trying to find the machine fraud, and we found it. We have all the evidence. So what all these outlets that have been calling me from the Washington Post, New York Times, every outlet in the country, they go, Mike Lindell, there's no evidence and he's making fraudulent statements. No, I have the evidence. I dare people to put it on. I dare Dominion to sue me because then it would get out faster.
This is why Fox is in such devastating legal trouble. They can't claim they were just airing these lies because it was newsworthy when they were acknowledging behind the scenes that it was total bullshit. And that's why Dominion has already been granted partial summary judgment, which means the judge is likely going to instruct the jury that Fox is already liable, at least in part. At this point, it's likely that Fox is going to be begging Dominion to settle, which I certainly hope Dominion won't do. I certainly hope this is going to go to trial and that Fox's brand will end up even more tarnished than it already is. Does that mean that the MAGA crowd is suddenly going to have an epiphany and stop believing that network's propaganda? No. But it does mean that Rupert Murdoch could lose a lot of what he seems to love the most: money. Before you go, a quick announcement. I've started a Spanish YouTube channel. Democrats desperately need to be able to appeal to Spanish-speaking audiences, so this is me doing my part. To help that channel get going in the algorithm so that we can finally start spreading our progressive message and breaking the conservative stranglehold on Spanish-speaking media, please subscribe and watch a few videos. The link to that channel, called Brian Tyler Cohen Espanol, is right here on this screen. And of course, to see more of my content in English, make sure to subscribe to this channel as well. The link is also right here on this screen. Thanks so much for watching. This is Democracy Watch. So Mark, today was the Supreme Court argument regarding Trump's presidential immunity that I think is safe to say was utter insanity. So first off, so as not to bury the lead here, Trump's lawyer argued that a president having his political opponent assassinated could be considered an official act and that entitled him to immunity. Here's a clip of that moment.
How about if a president orders the military to stage a coup?
I think that, as the Chief Justice pointed out earlier, where there is a whole series of, sort of guidelines against that, so to speak, like the UCMJ prohibits the military from following a plainly unlawful act. If one adopted Justice Alito's test, that would fall outside. Now, if one adopts, for example, the Fitzgerald test that we advanced, that may well be an official act.
Okay, so what?
Honestly, Brian, I have seen a lot of things in my 30-plus years as a litigator. I never thought I would see a lawyer stand in the U.S. Supreme Court and say that a president who orders the assassination of their political opponent. He also said, by the way, a president who stages a coup would be engaged in official action. I never thought I would see that. And that was quite shocking. It was even more dismaying, though, Brian, that several of the justices on the U.S. Supreme Court seemed to think this made perfect sense to them.
Right. To that point, 3 of those justices actually then signaled an openness to actually sending this case back to the lower court to continue litigating, adjudicating some of these claims. What would that mean in terms of the D.C. case actually going to trial before the 2024 election?
Yeah, just to be clear, you're not even counting Justice Thomas and Justice Alito, who were the furthest out there in terms of supporting the Trump position. They may not even need to send.
Right, those people didn't even want to send it back. They were like, right. we're bought in. Let's go.
Right. But if the case got sent back, what it means is that there would not be a trial before the 2024 election. I mean, I've said all along, and we've talked about this, that Donald Trump was playing two games here. One, a long shot to actually try to win this argument, which I don't think he thought and his lawyers thought they had a chance, although after the argument today, they probably feel better than they did.
Yeah.
But the real gambit they were engaged in was trying to get this case sent back to the trial court with some type of new test or new standard that would then require further hearings by the trial court, which, of course, those hearings would then be appealed to the D.C. Circuit, back to the U.S. Supreme Court, all of this eating up lots and lots of time. And we'd be talking about sometime in 2025 before a trial could actually take place. I hate to say that Donald Trump may be getting away with it, but I think he may get away with it.
Mark, you've argued cases in front of the Supreme Court. How much can we glean from the questions that these justices ask? Like, do you feel that they've basically tipped their hands, or could they ask questions that don't suggest whether they'll rule one way or the other?
Yeah, so, I mean, look, you have to be careful about over-reading questions, particularly among justices that seem to be genuinely wrestling with the issues. I think that as I listened to this argument, it seemed to me that Justice Alito and Justice Thomas and really probably Justice Gorsuch were not really struggling with the issues. I think they know which way they want to go. They may be around the edges trying to figure out exactly how far immunity goes, but they're pretty far in that camp. I think on the other side, the 3 liberal justices seemed very, very skeptical of Donald Trump's position, and I think disinclined to do that. So that left Kavanaugh, the chief, and Justice Coney Barrett. I think you're right, by the way, that Kavanaugh and Chief Justice Roberts both seemed intrigued with sending this case back. Coney Barrett, maybe, although she was the most uneasy with this idea of immunity. So I think this is going to boil down to whether, frankly, the Chief Justice wants to write the opinion of the court. If he does, he'll either be able to pick a side with the conservatives, or if he can drag another justice along with the liberals. But I think it's going to be something in the middle. And I think likely a remand back to the trial court.
Can you explain that a little bit? Like, isn't it just that even if John Roberts is in the minority, would he have some sway here just by virtue of being the Chief Justice? What if the other 5 conservatives all agree full tilt with what Donald Trump's lawyers are arguing, that he has complete and total immunity?
Yeah, no, the Chief Justice only has very limited powers as Chief Justice. When it comes to voting on the outcomes, he's just one of the justices. So he doesn't get any special power, no special vote. So if there are 5 justices, say, to his right, who want to take a harder line, they'll get that opinion. My point only is that I think that a Chief Justice, any Chief Justice, and particularly John Roberts, when there's a historic opinion, he wants to be seen as the person who authored it. So I think he's going to be looking for a coalition, which is why I think he is centering around sending this case back, because he probably figures he can get enough justices to punt that it gives him the ability to write the opinion. But you put a good point out there, which is it is also possible that you wind up with Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh, and then gets Justice Barrett on board, and they just write an opinion, and he's left out.
Yeah, Mark, I'm trying to be measured here, but does it not blow your mind that conservative members of the court seem more concerned at the prospect of the president being prosecuted for committing crimes than just the president committing those crimes?
Yeah, it's astounding. I mean, it's absolutely astounding. Some of the arguments we heard today that were treated as serious arguments were, frankly, things that I would have said were beyond fringe just a few hours ago, 24 hours ago, 48 hours ago. For example, this idea that that was floated, I think, by Justice Alito, that somehow if you don't provide presidents with absolute immunity or close to it, they won't leave office because they won't want to be prosecuted. Well, I mean, that seems entirely backwards.
If only we had 200 plus years of precedent to look back on.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that the reason why Donald Trump did what he did was not because he was afraid of being prosecuted. Right?
He wasn't afraid of leaving office. He didn't ever want to leave office. That was the whole point of this. They've got it completely backwards.
Yeah, so there were a lot of aspects to this argument that were, frankly, really astounding, disappointing. I mean, another point was, at various times the lawyer for the government kept trying to focus on the case before the justices saying, look, you don't need to worry about these distant possible cases. Like here you have a president who tried to use an armed insurrection to overturn a free and fair election. Let's just focus on these facts. And you heard some of the conservative justices say repeatedly, we don't want to talk about the facts. We don't want to talk about the facts of this case. And I'm thinking, what do you mean you don't want to talk about the facts of this case? This is the case that's before you. Yeah. So, I mean, it was a very, very peculiar argument. It was a very, very peculiar hearing. It went on for 3 hours. Normally I'd say you can't read too much into the questions, but a lot of the justices I felt like were really showing their hands. And look, Brian, if we worried about this being a test between conservative jurisprudence, originalism and textualism on one side, and, some type of loyalty or outcome determinative predilection to be in favor of Donald Trump, there was no question of where the questioning lined up here because there was no textualist argument. There's nothing in the Constitution that provides immunity for the president, even though, by the way, it does provide it for members of the House and Senate. There's no originalist argument here. There's nothing that was in the original debates that suggested they thought they were giving presidents immunity. In fact, remember, the country had just revolted from a king, right? Far from wanting to give immunity to the chief executive, they were quite suspicious of executive power. So, I hesitate to say this because I care as a lawyer and as someone who's argued for the Supreme Court in the integrity of the courts. And Lord knows, let's hope that the questioning is not indicative of where we wind up. But it is possible we wind up with an opinion that does not look anything like what we would normally expect out of a court.
This is like anti-originalism, basically. And to that exact point, what would happen if the tables were turned and it was Joe Biden who was in Donald Trump's spot here and it was Biden's lawyers who were arguing for full presidential immunity? Do you think that they would be making the exact same arguments that, again, completely undermine all of their previously stated positions as textualists, as originalists?
I am hard pressed to think they would. I mean, I think it's extremely unlikely. I also think it's extremely unlikely that President Biden would trash the Constitution to such an extent to send his lawyers into court to argue that he could engage in the assassination of his political opponents. So I think it's an extreme hypothetical that is unlikely and unfortunate in many respects. But you put your finger on one of the things that I worry about for the future, which is, they say they're not deciding just this case. They don't want to focus on the facts here, that this is for future presidents. But it will, if they rule as extremely as it's possible they do you really trust that in the future they would not reverse themselves if, in fact, the political situation was different?
Well, you mean after they've shown themselves to have so much integrity?
This is going to be as tough as the cases that have come before it have been for the American public to accept, Dobbs and a lot of these cases where you're just left asking, how is this possible? I have to say, if the court is worried about its institutional integrity, it's going to be a very, very difficult road if they wind up saying that the president of the United States can engage in political assassinations, presumably, by the way, against Supreme Court justices too.
Right.
I mean, while he's at it, he could assassinate members of the House, members of the Senate, other branches of government. It just, I think, is a very dangerous place in our democracy we are right now if the Supreme Court were to take this extremist view.
Well, I guess the obvious question here is, if the Supreme Court rules in the way that it looks like they may rule, then what's to stop Joe Biden, other than his integrity? But I'm asking this kind of tongue-in-cheek. What's to stop Joe Biden from just seeking to jail Donald Trump the day after the decision is handed down? I mean, if a president doesn't have to follow the Constitution, yeah, exactly. Like you're about to say, cancel the election. Why not do it?
This is why I have to believe that despite all of the provocative questioning, despite the 3 hours of arguments, I have to believe at the end of the day, the Chief Justice is going to wrangle into a 5-vote coalition a more sensible outcome. Now, the price that may be paid there will likely be the delay, a remand and a delay. And by the way, that in and of itself is no victory. Like, we cannot let the frog be boiled here. We cannot say that somehow if that happens, this was a victory. Because a victory in this case for the rule of law is that Donald Trump goes on trial like yesterday, that there's no further delays. So that wouldn't be a victory, but I have to think that that is still the most likely outcome.
Right. We can't let the Overton window shift so much that the pittance that we would be given, which would be further delay of Donald Trump finally being held accountable for his crimes on January 6th, would seem like a reasonable alternative to just allowing full-blown presidential immunity for committing crimes while in office. Kind of in the same way how we shouldn't accept like a 15-week abortion ban after we had Dobbs for 50 years because Donald Trump says, well, look, I'm not gonna say a 6-week abortion ban. I'll give you 15 and seem like the white knight in response to that, just because we've kind of become normalized to all of the rule of law, all of our rights kind of being chipped away at.
Yeah, this is the modus operandi of Donald Trump. It is to say something outrageous, to argue something outrageous, to advance a position that is completely outrageous, and then normalize it through the Republican Party, through his surrogates, through the Federalist Society, normalize it through Fox News. And then at the end of it, when he doesn't get everything that he wants, people are like, oh, well, look, there was a splitting of difference. And we cannot let that happen with issues that are core to democracy.
Right. We can't just do extremism -1 and think that that's okay. Mark, I want to turn your attention to this moment from Ketanji Brown Jackson.
You seem to be worried about the president being chilled. I think that we would have a really significant opposite problem if the president wasn't chilled. If someone with those kinds of powers, the most powerful person in the world, with the greatest amount of authority, could go into office knowing that there would be no potential penalty for committing crimes. I'm trying to understand what the disincentive is from turning the Oval Office into, the seat of criminal activity in this country.
What would be the incentive if these judges rule that a president is above the law?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say, we talked a lot about the conservative justices here. Justice Jackson was brilliant today.
Yeah.
This was obviously an argument that she took very seriously coming in. She was very prepared with excellent questions. And I think this point was a really, really important one, which is that, we look back on history, and for you and I, and for most of our viewers, it was history, but about the Nixon era, when there was kind of a criminal conspiracy going on in the Oval Office. And the lesson that history taught us was that at the end of it, Richard Nixon had to resign and then receive a presidential pardon. If, in fact, there was no criminal sanction possible at the end of that rainbow, then, in today's world in which, Mitch McConnell and his would never vote for a conviction to impeach a Republican president, that ongoing criminal conspiracy in the Oval Office would continue. It would not have ended, and it would give a Donald Trump-like figure every incentive to do exactly that.
Right. Not only does it disincentivize you from running for president, it actually incentivizes a criminal from doing it because it's just a magic force field around you, which is exactly what Donald Trump wants as he's contending with 88 criminal charges right now.
Right. And when he wants to, for example, violate the emoluments clause, remember that? When he wants to sell businesses to the Saudis or to Russia, right? Like it is a problem to immunize anyone from all criminal behavior, because anyone who can get away with anything without being subject to criminal laws is dangerous. It is particularly dangerous when that person is also the most powerful person in the world, the president of the United States.
Samuel Alito is 74 years old. Clarence Thomas is 75. John Roberts and Sotomayor are both 69. The next president may very well nominate the replacement for one of, if not all of these justices. Talk about what's at stake if Trump wins in November, especially in light of what we saw today.
Look, Donald Trump said in a candid moment that he wants to be a dictator. Then he paused, realized that this might not be great. I think Sean Hannity prompted him, and he said he just wants to be dictator for a day. Well, if Donald Trump can get immunity, absolute immunity, from prosecution for any crimes he commits in office, if he becomes president of the United States, I expect he will conduct himself in a criminal manner from start to finish. Whether the Supreme Court is with him or against him, he will just be the criminal that he is. Now, the fact that he will also then be able to make the court majority even worse or more conservative and more beholden to him. I mean, just imagine the tactics he would use in choosing cabinet officials, choosing new Supreme Court members. So this is a critical election for so many reasons. It is even more critical if, in fact, the Supreme Court holds Donald Trump above the law in some respect. And if they remand it, it is critical that he not be in office because he needs to stand trial. And if he's not going to stand trial in these federal cases before November, he needs to stand trial after November. And if he's put back in Oval Office, we know that's not going to happen.
Well, look, Mark, you've been a leader in signaling the alarm about what's happening in the courts right now. So for those watching, if you want to continue to support the work that Mark and his team do, the invaluable work that they do, please sign up for Democracy Docket up with the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. It's the free news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything voting in elections, which, again, is ground zero right now. With that said, I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.